By now, you probably have heard people talking about a thing called server-side tagging. Some say that it can increase your data accuracy, while others might say that they use it to avoid ad blockers. Or maybe they mention some other reason. But what is server-side tagging really, and do you need it? In this video, I will explain what Google Tag Manager server-side tagging is, what are its benefits and drawbacks. We will also create our first setup, and we will send data to Google Analytics 4. First, let's take a look at the usual way how Google Tag Manager and analytics tools work on a website. So let's say that you have a website, and on that website you install the web container of Google Tag Manager. Then with Google Tag Manager, you install Google Analytics, and once Google Analytics is activated, it tracks user interactions on a website. So if a visitor loads a page, Google Analytics tracks that. If something is clicked, GA tracks that as well. And every time an interaction or some event or something is tracked by Google Analytics on a website, GA sends that data directly to Google Analytics servers. And the URL of the request might be google-analytics.com. It might contain some subdomains for specific regions, but basically the main idea is that analytics tool sends the data directly to the provider. So in this case, that's Google. And this is called client side. So what is happening directly in the browser, and then the request is sent directly to the provider, that is called client side. Now, the process with server-side tagging looks a bit different. We have a website, then we have some tracking code. So for example, it might be web Google Tag Manager container. Maybe your developer built some custom code that is sending data somewhere. So basically you have some client-side JavaScript code. Then if we are talking about web Google Tag Manager container, you activate Google Analytics. But then instead of sending data directly to Google, your tracking code sends the data to your cloud instance where you have server-side Google Tag Manager. So basically somewhere in the cloud, you have a server, well, we can call that, and then you send the data there. So in this case, we still have the client-side component, but then from your server-side setup, you can send that data to other providers, such as Google Analytics or Facebook or something else. So you might be thinking that you probably get the main concept, but the question is why? Why is this beneficial to me or my business? And here are some of the benefits of server-side tagging. First of all, you can use it to reduce the impact on your page speed. Because with regular client-side tracking, if you want to install, let's say, 5 tracking pixels, one for each vendor, you load 5 different JavaScript libraries that add more impact to your page loading speed. With server-side tagging, it might be enough to load one tracking code, for example, Google Analytics 4, and then the other pixels get data from your server. Also, with server-side tagging, you have control what kind of data is sent to vendors, because when you activate tracking codes client-side, or in other words, in the browser, those vendors might collect a lot of additional data that you might not be even aware of. But with server-side tagging, you can limit what kind of data do they get, because your configuration in the server will decide which parameters are sent to, let's say, Facebook, and no additional things will be received by them. That's where the next benefit is that you can reduce the risk of personally identifiable information leaks. This is especially important for larger companies that can get much higher fines if they have some leaks or some other issues related to user data. Then the next benefit, but some people might argue with that, is the ability to reduce the impact of ad blockers, because there are various extensions that you can install in the browser that will block things like website Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, maybe some other tracking codes. So with help of server-side tagging, you can reduce the impact because you can load some of those tracking codes directly from your server, meaning that some of the extensions will treat those scripts as part of your website, and those kind of resources will not be blocked. Then you can apply server-side tagging for more complex use cases. For example, you send some page view or some event from your website to your server-side setup, and then in your server, some additional data enrichment happens where your server contacts maybe your CRM, then gets, let's say, user ID or something like that, or additional information about the user, and then that enriched request is sent further to some marketing or analytics tool. Also, if your setup is using some sensitive information like API keys, when they are stored in the server-side container, they are more secure because nobody from the public inspecting your website, they won't be able to see what are those API keys, because what happens in the server, that is not publicly visible. But even though there are many advantages, there are also some disadvantages related to server-side tagging. So the first one is that this is a paid solution. Well, server-side container itself is free, so that is still the way it was before, but there are some hosting costs. For example, if you're using Google Cloud Platform, it might cost you even hundreds or even thousands of dollars per month, depending on how much data do you track and how much data do you send. So for smaller businesses that are just, let's say, starting with their tracking and they don't want to pay at least, $50 or so per month, this might not be a good option. Because admit it, Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager have been free forever. And many people are just used to not pay for their analytics setup. Also, server-side tagging is not for everyone because it requires a lot of technical knowledge. If you thought that website Google Tag Manager already was fairly complex because we have some JavaScript stuff, we have some document object models, some other things like cookies. So server-side tagging adds an additional layer of complexity because then you also need to learn how HTTP requests work. You need to learn additional terms such as client, and I will later explain what that is in this video. So definitely things get more complicated. And if you think that you're pretty allergic to technical stuff, then server-side tagging is probably not for you. And also it is more difficult to debug because then you will need to check several preview modes. Sometimes you won't be able to see properly what is happening in your server from the browser because the browser cannot access what is happening in your server. So there will be more challenges. Now let's take a look at how can we actually configure server-side Google Tag Manager. Here is the process that we will follow. First, we will need to create a Google Tag Manager server container, and then we will provision, or in other words, create that container in Google Cloud. It is also possible to host Google Tag Manager container with other providers, such as Amazon, for example. But in this particular tutorial, I will be using Google Cloud Platform. Then we will send the data from your website to your server-side container. That can be done with Google Tag Manager. If you have hard-coded GTag, which is the native Google Analytics tracking code, you can configure, or actually your developers can configure that to send data to your server as well. Or maybe you are a developer, or maybe your developers can code their own custom lightweight library that tracks particular interactions and sends them to your server-side endpoint. Then we will take a look at what can be configured in your server-side container. We will look at tags, triggers, variables. I will also introduce the new concept, which is clients. Then when we have the data in your server-side container, we configure tags, triggers, and all the other stuff. Now it's time to send the data from your server-side GTM further to marketing and analytics tools. Let's say Google Analytics 4 in this case. And then finally, we will need to test and check if everything is working properly, meaning that are we going to see the data in the debug view of GA4. So here I have opened Google Tag Manager. Let's say that I have a demo website. This is a WordPress website, and I already have installed the web Google Tag Manager container on this website. This is the most standard and basic setup, but if you haven't done that yet, then take a look at the description of this video where I explain in a quick tutorial how to install Google Tag Manager on a website. The demo website is a WordPress website, so what I did is that I installed a plugin which is called GTM for WP. When I installed it and activated it, then I can go to settings, and here I can enter the Google Tag Manager container ID, and I'm talking about my regular website Google Tag Manager container. So the things that I'm showing you right now, they are part of the regular usual setup of Google Tag Manager. But in my example, this is necessary because I will later use web Google Tag Manager to send data to my server Google Tag Manager. So I will copy the web container ID, I will paste it here, then I will turn on the container and click Save. This is the basic, most standard stuff. So now Google Tag Manager is installed on a website. Now let's take a look at what should we do when it comes to server-side tagging. So if you already have opened a container in Google Tag Manager, you can create a new container by clicking Admin and then clicking plus right here. If you see a list that looks like this, then you can create these 3 dots right here and create a container in your existing Google Tag Manager account. So I will click this, then I can name this container. Let's say I will call this SGTM demo. And then we select the server type. Click create. And then Google Tag Manager will ask you, where do you want to host or how do you want to configure your tagging server? So you have 2 options. You can either automatically provision, and this will use the Google Cloud Platform, or you can do manual provision. For example, with this option, you would be able to select that you want your server to be in the European Union, but just for sake of demonstration, I will be using the standard option, which is automatically provision tagging server. So let's click this. And if you are new to all Google Cloud Platform stuff, you will need to create a billing account. And this means that you will need to enter your credit card information. You will not be billed at the beginning. Also, you will get a generous amount of free credit. So you will be able to try this for at least several months for free. And also, if you try this and you don't like this, you can at any time downgrade your server from a paid solution, or let's say paid pricing plan, to a free plan, and that way you will not be charged. But anyway, this is a required step. You need to create a billing account. So click create billing account. Then you might need to agree with some terms, and then you will need to complete all the steps, enter credit card information, and that way you will create that billing account. And as you can see right here, you will get $300 in credit. So it will be enough for the next 2 or 3 months if you decide to play around with the paid features of Google Cloud Platform. And I mean server-side tagging. So now I will pause the video. I will complete all the steps. I will create the account and then I will come back. All right, now I'm back. I created my billing account. Then I was redirected back to Google Tag Manager. So here is my server-side container. I can click it. And here, if you are familiar with Google Tag Manager, and I mean web Google Tag Manager, you will see that there's a new thing right here called clients. So later in this video, we will take a look what does it mean and how to use that. And here, if you click on this container ID, you will see that you need to automatically provision the server. So basically, we still haven't provisioned that yet. Right now, we just have created the billing account. So let's click this button again. Now we will select our billing account and then click select billing account and create server. After that, you will see that the server is being created. This may take a few minutes, so I will pause the video and I will resume it once the server is successfully created. And now the server has been created. Here you can see some information about it. Here is the Google Cloud Project ID. And if you want to see, let's say, the server logs, a quick way is to click this icon right here, and it will open in a new tab that particular project. And you will also see some summary and some additional information. Also here we have the default URL ID. So this is the URL that we can use right now while we are testing and to check if our server is working. But we will do that a bit later. So let's close this for now. And now let's take a look at one new concept that was not available in web Google Tag Manager containers, and that is clients. They are a key part of Google Tag Manager setup because when you have a website, you have Google Tag Manager installed on it, and you use Google Tag Manager to activate Google Analytics, all of this is happening client side. But then you need to send this data to your tagging server. So something in the tagging server must accept and process that incoming data. And that's where clients are necessary. Basically, when you send some request, there must be at least some client in the container, and I mean server container, that recognizes the request, processes that request, and then makes the data available for your tags in the server container. So when the data is processed, triggers are activated, and then tags fire. Those tags send data further to your marketing and analytics platforms, for example, Google Analytics 4. So when you go to the clients section in server-side container, you will have 2 predefined clients right here. One is for GA3, also known as Universal Analytics, and the other one is for GA4. In the future, when Universal Analytics stops working, this client will probably no longer be added by default in the container. You can also add some additional clients if you want. For example, you can load the Google Tag Manager container from your server, or in this case, it's actually called proxying, when your server downloads the container from Google and then loads it from your own domain. That way, there's a lower chance that ad blockers will block your Google Tag Manager. But in this tutorial, we will be using mainly this client, which is GA4. A request can be processed only by one client, but when the client captures the data and makes it available to the container, multiple tags can use that data and send the data further to Google Analytics, Facebook, Conversions API, or somewhere else. Anyway, now let's check if the server that was provisioned, or in other words created, if it works properly. That's why we should click this preview right here, and it will open a new tab with the preview mode. Here you will see the same host name, which is available right here if you click on the container ID. So currently our server can be accessed by using this particular URL. So if I right now copy this host name without anything after GTM, or actually after .com, so I will copy this, then I open a new tab, and in fact I can even maybe write something like $test equals true. Now I did a request and I sent it to our tagging server. Ignore this error, this is normal, but if you have the preview mode of the server container enabled, you will see that request right here. So you can click it here and you can click the request and see what data was incoming. We can click the incoming request, and this is some information that the server got together with the request. Most of this is technical. It also includes things like IP address. So right now there's nothing that we can use in our Google Analytics server-side setup, but soon we will be able to do that. So if you see your request right here when you enter something after the slash, it means that the server was provisioned properly and it is working. So all of this means that our tagging server is ready to receive some data. Now we need to send some data from the website to our server. And one of the ways how this can be done is by using client-side Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics 4. So I will now open the web container. In this container, I already have two tags. One is the GA4 configuration tag, which is essential for the installation of GA4. And then also I have some event tag just for testing purposes. Right now, these tags send data by default to Google Analytics 4 directly. But we can configure them to send data to our tagging server instead. And we can do that by opening the configuration tag and then clicking on pencil and selecting Send to Server Container. Now we have to enter the URL of our server, and we already know that. It is available in the preview mode, or we can also find it right here if we click on the container ID of our server container. So you can copy this and then paste it right here. And once you save this, this change will apply to all Google Analytics 4 tags that are using this configuration tag. For example, this event tag right here, it is using the configuration tag. So it will inherit all settings from that config tag, including the URL of our server container. Now let's test if the data from my demo website is being sent to the server-side endpoint. So in the web container, I will click preview, and then I will enter the URL of a demo website that I created for this particular video. So I will enter it like that, and then click connect. I see that the preview mode is connected. I also see that in the preview mode, my configuration tag has fired. I can click the tag, and I see that the server container URL is this one. Now let's check the preview mode of the server container and see if we get that request there. So let's go to the server containers preview mode, and here we have the request. We can click it right here, and then I can click on the incoming HTTP request. And here we see all the data that was sent from our web container to our server container. Also, I can click to expand more to see some additional details right here. So this request was claimed by the Google Analytics 4 client. And then that client made this event visible right here. So if I click here and then I click the event data, I see what kind of parameters did the client extract from the incoming request. We have things such as event name, because that's the event that our Google Analytics 4 tag sent. Then we have things like page title, page referrer, page location, and so on. Now, if I go back to the demo page and click this link right here, another tag fired, which is my event tag. So now I can go to the preview mode of the server container and I will see that header click event as well. Together with that event, there's one additional parameter, which is link URL. So this is the parameter that I send with the header click event in my website Google Tag Manager container. So when you're working with server-side setup, and if you're using client-side GTM, you will need to jump between two containers and two preview modes. So right now we are at this stage. On the website, Google Tag Manager tracked a particular event. It fired a GA4 tag and it sent the data to our server. The client claimed that request and made some data available in the container. The next step is to configure the tag in the server container that will send the data further to other tools. In this example, we will be using Google Analytics 4. So basically, we will forward the request further to GA. And we can do that by going back to the server container, and then we will need to create a new tag. Because if you go to the tags section, there is nothing here. Click New, then Tag Configuration, and this process looks similar to what we have in the web container. However, the list of tags available is much smaller. So now we are going to send that request that we received from GA4 on the website further to GA4. That is why we can click this tag, and then we can choose to override some settings if we want. But if we don't want to do that, then this tag will just forward all the received data further to its destination. So let's keep these settings as they are right here. Then we need to set when do we want this particular tag to fire. That's why we need to choose triggering. In the triggering section, we also don't have a lot of variety compared to the web container. So if I want to create a new trigger, I click plus right here, then trigger configuration, and then we basically have three options. It's custom, custom event, and page view. These two are basically the convenient modifications of the custom trigger. That's why, to show you the general process of the configuration, I will be using a custom one. Then we can decide when exactly do we want that tag to fire. Do we want our GA4 tag in the server fire on every incoming request, even if that request is not related to GA4? Or do we want to fire it only when the data is related to GA4? Well, in this case, obviously, I want to send data to GA4 only that is related to GA4 from the website. That is why we are going to select some events, and then we have several variables right here. Actually, just one right now, event name, but I can choose another built-in variable and then select client name. Here, I want to enter the condition that if the request was claimed by a particular client, of which name is GA4, because that is the client name, if you go and check the clients section of the server container. Now let's name this trigger. So for example, all requests from GA4, and then click Save. Now the final step is to name this tag. So I can name this something like GA4 forward all requests, or something like that. Because basically, in this case, the tag doesn't do anything additional. It just gets the data from the client of GA4 and then sends it further to Google Analytics servers. So click Save. Now let's click the preview to refresh the server container preview mode. And now let's refresh the website, and I mean the demo website. This means that the new page view will be tracked right here. So I will click container loaded, my config tag fired. It sent data to this server container URL. And now if I go to the preview mode of the server container, I will see the page view. And on this particular request, we see that the tag has fired in our server container. So again, this is an incoming request. Then that request is claimed by the GA4 client, and that client makes this event available right here. So it kind of processes the request and then dispatches this event right here. And then on this event, we see that our tag has fired. If you click this right here, you will see the outgoing request from your server further to Google Analytics. So I can click this and I will see what information was sent from my server to GA4. Now the last step would be to check the debug view of Google Analytics 4. So I have that property already created. Now I am in admin, and then I will go to debug view. And here I have my two requests, well actually two events that were forwarded from the server, because I have two events right here. One is user engagement and the tag fired, and page view and the tag fired here. That is why I have those two events right here. I can click them and I see what kind of information was forwarded to Google Analytics from my server. So you might be thinking, like, what's the point of just forwarding the events to your server and then from there sending data further to Google Analytics? It doesn't look like a lot of possibilities. But here's the thing, you can actually modify and sometimes override, if you want, additional things on the server. So for example, here I am in the server GTM container. I click on my tag and here I can add some additional configuration. For example, right now, when the page view request was sent from my server, it was anonymized. So I can click on the page view, I can click on request, and then I can see the outgoing request. Here I see the IP address and then the last digit was changed to 0. Maybe your company's legal department is very strict and they don't want to send any IP at all. So you can do that by going to your Google Analytics 4 tag, clicking the pencil right here, and then you can select to redact user IP address and set this to true. Let's check how this will work now. Let's save this, click the preview to refresh the preview mode, and then I will refresh the demo page once again. Once I do that, I go back to the preview mode, I see the page view, and then I go to requests and I click the outgoing request. Now you will see that the user IP parameter no longer contains the actual anonymized user IP. Another use case could be that maybe you want to send the data from your website to multiple Google Analytics properties. So we have one tag that sends the data to GA4 property, and that property measurement ID is configured in the web container. So we have the measurement ID right here. But what if we have another property where we also want to send the copy of that data? In that case, you can go to the server container, click create new, or you can just make a copy of the existing tag. So that's actually what I will do. I will click this, click 3 dots, copy, and then I will write something like make a copy. And then here I can enter a measurement ID of a different Google Analytics 4 property. So now if I click save, and then I will refresh the page. So now on the incoming page view, we have two tags fired, and one of them sent the data to the normal measurement ID. You can find that measurement ID here. And then another copy is sent to a different property. So I can click outgoing request here, and I will see that this is that other property's measurement ID. And there are more settings that you can explore in the Google Analytics 4 tag. For example, maybe you want to exclude some parameters from being sent with a request. For example, maybe you don't want to send a parameter called SR, which is screen resolution. Like normally you will want to send that, but just for the sake of demonstration, let's say that this parameter is containing some very sensitive personal information and you don't want to send that further. So you can actually take this SR and exclude it in the tag settings. So you can go to event parameters, parameters to exclude, and then enter SR. If you want, you can add some additional parameters. If you want, you can also overwrite them. For example, maybe you want to change the value of the parameter, which is called DR or something like that. So then you could enter DR, and then here you can insert a variable that contains a modified value. So there are many things that you can customize in the server container, and it becomes as an additional layer of your setup where you can have more control. However, this video is just an introduction to server-side tagging, so there's not enough time to explain all the possible use cases. But before we go to the next step of the process, let's take an additional look at the debug mode of the server container. So just like on the web container, you have the left side, but these are not data layer pushes. These are incoming requests right here. And then based on those requests, the client claims the request, and then it kind of processes and generates some additional event where your tag can fire. So when you click on the request and you are in the request tab, you can see what client claimed that request. And remember, only one client can claim one request. Then we can see the incoming request here and here, but here it is displayed more conveniently. Then we have the outgoing requests from servers. And then we see what kind of tags fired because of that request. So we have two outgoing requests because we have two tags, one that forwards events and actually all the data of GE4 to our main property. And then we have another tag that sends one more request to another property as a copy. Then if you want to see what kind of variables are available, then you need to switch from the request to this event right here. And right now our container does not have many variables, but if you want, you can go to the variable section right here and investigate what kind of variables there are. Because you can create cookie variables, you can extract certain part of the URL with request parameter variables and so on. Then there is a new tab compared to the web container, which is event data. So this is the data that was parsed by the client that claimed the request. So in this case, the request was received, this client claimed the request, and then this is what was extracted from that particular request. And then there is console, which is fairly similar to the errors tab of the web container preview mode, where you can see what is happening. Maybe the client is logging some errors, so definitely keep an eye on this tab as well. So everything looks fine. We send the data to server container. From there, we send data to Google Analytics 4. We see the data in the debug view, so everything looks fine, right? Well, there is one thing that is highly recommended to do if you're using server-side Google Tag Manager, or actually any server-side tagging solution. Right now, when we are sending data, we are sending to a third-party domain, because my main website, or actually in this case the demo website, is using this domain, but the URL of the server is using a different domain, which is appspot.com. So what does it mean is that if we are sending requests to our server, or maybe we get some response from the server, those are considered third-party requests. And in the current context of the industry, third-party cookies are already blocked in many places, and in the near future, they will be blocked completely. So we need to change this domain right here to some sort of subdomain that is part of the domain that I use on my demo website. And this can be done by going to the Google Cloud Platform, and you can click this icon right here. By the way, again, to remind you, this pop-up appears when you click on the container ID in your server container. So I will click this, then make sure that the GTM container ID right here is matching your container ID here, and then go to App Engine. So keep looking for that. If you don't see it, click More Products right here at the bottom left corner, and then scroll down and keep looking for App Engine. Here it is, and then click Settings. By the way, you're going to use this more often, so you can pin the option so that it would be available at the top of the sidebar. So pin it, and then go to Settings. Then click Custom Domains, and then Add Custom Domain. Here you have to come up with a subdomain specifically dedicated for your server container. So if, let's say, the website is www.yourdomain.com, then you should come up with some subdomain for the server. So it could be something like data.mydomain.com, analytics.mydata.com, or something else. Let's say that in this case, I will enter measure, then my domain of the demo website, and .com. Then I click verify, and this will open a new tab. I'm using Cloudflare to manage that domain, so I will select other, and then I will get this text that I have to include in my domain's settings so that Google would know that this domain belongs to me. So the next steps depend on what kind of hosting provider are you using or where are you keeping your domain. As I've said, I'm using Cloudflare, so in my case, I would need to go to the domain settings, then DNS, and then add a new record that will contain this particular part. So here it says that I have to add txt record, and that's what I will do. So let's click add record. Then I select type, which is txt. And here I have to enter the subdomain that I will be using, but just the subdomain without the main domain. So if I was using measure.mydomain.com, here I have to use just measure. And then here I have to paste the content, which is this text right here. So I will save. And then I have to go to the Webmaster Central that was opened after I tried to create a new domain. And then I will click verify. Depending on your provider where you're keeping your domains, it might be very quick, or it might take maybe even up to 24 or more hours. So you will need to be patient. When it comes to Cloudflare, it is quite fast, so I was lucky to verify that within seconds. So now when I verified here, then I go back to the console of Google Cloud and then I click refresh domains and it was verified. I see the success message here. Now I have to decide which subdomain will I be using, and that is definitely this one. We don't need to add www in front of it, so I will just delete this one, keep this one, and click Save Mappings. When you see the success status, then click Continue. And now you, or most likely your developers, will need to add 8 DNS records to the settings of the domain. 4 A records, and then 4 AAAA records. So now I will show you how I would add that in Cloudflare, but in your case, again, the steps might be different. So I go to the DNS settings of my domain, and then I will add more records. So I will add the first one, the type is A, and then I copy the first IP address. Here I have to enter the subdomain once again, and I will need to do that for every record that I will add. In this case, you should disable proxying, so it will be DNS only, and then click Save. And then do the same for all the other records. So now I will pause the video and I will continue once I finish. And that's it. Just make sure that you have 4 A records, 4 of these records, and then all of them have disabled proxying if you're using Cloudflare. The next step is to go back to the Google Cloud and click Done. Now you will see that this is still being activated and it will take a while, but eventually this will start working and SSL security certificate will be issued automatically by Google. And when I say it might take a while, I mean it might take like even hours. So don't stare right now at the screen. You can go and do some other work and then come back after a while and check if the status is successful. In the meantime, I will pause the video and I will resume when this is verified. If eventually you see this warning, then don't worry, wait for a bit longer because the certificate activation will retry automatically. So in this case, I would say waiting for the next 24 hours would be the best option. And now finally, it says auto renewing. So this means that everything is working fine. The next step is to update our Google Tag Manager server container settings so that it would use this as the main domain. So let's go to server container, then click admin, then container settings. Make sure that this container is used right now. And here you should paste the new container URL. So copy it like that and paste it. Don't include any trailing slashes, but make sure to include the HTTPS in front of it. And then click save. Then you should go to your web container and change the server URL as well in all tags that are sending data to your server-side endpoint. And then click save. So now let's test if this is working properly. Let's close the old server preview mode where we are using AppSpot. Then I will close the webmaster page and then I will refresh the web container. And then I will also refresh or enable the preview mode of my server container. So the first thing that you will notice is that the URL right now is no longer AppSpot. It's my custom domain that I verified. Now, if I go to the demo page and let's say I will reload it, let's check if you see that request here. And we see the request, we see scroll events, we see page view events. So everything is working as expected. So what we have done here so far in this video did not cost you anything. In fact, you were using a free plan of the App Engine because App Engine is where you're hosting your server. So the free pricing plan is actually called Standard, and it was more than enough for us to test our own events. But that plan will definitely not be enough for your live website. So if you right now, let's say, publish your web container, your server-side setup will start getting much more events, much more traffic, and this means that your server will not have enough resources to process all the data. This means that right now, if you want to go live, you would need to upgrade from App Engine Standard to App Engine Flexible. And that's where you would start paying money. Of course, right now we still have that $300 credit, but you would use that in several months. And then after that, you would need to pay money. So what I will do next, you don't have to follow that if you don't want to upgrade to a paid plan and to use server-side tagging in your live website. If you were just playing around, that's okay. You can continue watch the video, but you don't have to actually follow me. But on the other hand, as I said, if you want to launch your setup and to install it on your live website, the next step is necessary. So now you should go back to your Google Cloud project. And if you forgot how to get here, then you can go to your server container, click on the container ID, and then click this icon. Then make sure that you have selected the correct container and then activate Cloud Shell. This might take a while, but eventually you will see this loaded, click continue, and finally it will look like this. Basically, Cloud Shell is a command line tool that allows you to communicate with your server. You can write some commands and then the server will execute them. This is where you will have to upgrade from App Engine Standard to App Engine Flexible. Now we need to copy and paste one command into Cloud Shell. Below this video, you will find a link to a documentation. This is the official documentation, and here you should scroll down until you see the bash command here. So copy this or just click this icon here, then go back to Google Cloud. And if it says that it was disconnected, then try to reconnect and then paste that command that you copied. I'm on Windows, so I will click Control V and then click Enter. It will ask you to authorize, so do that. Keep in mind that this process will take some time, so you should be more patient. Now I will click Enter to continue. Then it asks you about container configuration, but there's already available configuration. So just click Enter. Then you can enter the policy script URL. This is a policy of your server container. I will not be explaining what it is in this video, but if you want to learn more, I will post a link below the video to a documentation. So right now, just click Enter. Then it will ask you whether you want to include logging or not. Logging means that every request in your server will be logged. Logging is useful for troubleshooting. However, keep in mind that it will increase your costs because those logs must be stored somewhere and that storage costs money. So when it comes to logging, just click Enter and continue. Now it's time for deployment type. This is important. So right now we were working in a testing mode. So the deployment type was testing. Now we have to switch to live, or in other words, to production. This means that we will also upgrade to App Engine Flexible and we will get some additional servers, or in this case, instances that will start costing us money. If at some point in the future you don't want to pay anymore and you want to downgrade and go back to testing, you will need to run that bash script once again, and then in deployment type, switch from production to testing. So now I will switch to production and hit Enter. Then the next setting is auto scaling. So this feature in App Engine allows you to automatically use more virtual servers in case you get a spike in traffic. So if suddenly you get a lot of users, then App Engine will add additional virtual servers for some period of time, and then your server container will be using them. Of course, this will cost you more, but when that spike ends, then the setup will downscale back to your initial number of instances. So it is recommended to have this setting set as on. And now you have to select how many servers do you want to use, or also they are known as instances. It is recommended to have at least 3, but for smaller websites, it is also okay to have 2. Usually one server costs around $40 per month. So if we have 3 servers, it means that usually, most likely, your server-side setup will cost you at least $120. But actually the amount will be a bit larger because you will also have to pay for the logging data that you store, also some traffic going in and there. So the cost will be a bit higher, but the price here will be at least $120. If you decide to go with 2 servers, then the lowest price will be around $80. So right now let's keep 3. And then they will ask you to enter the maximum number of servers in case that spike of traffic will occur. So let's enter 6. Then CPU target utilization, so you can keep this at 0.6. And then here's a summary. Now you have to confirm everything. So it's either Y, which is yes, or N, which is no. Enter Y and then enter. And now your App Engine will start upgrading. It will take a while, so I will pause the video and then I will continue when this ends. And in the meantime, you can grab a coffee or something. What I noticed is that Cloud Shell does not like when you go to other browser tabs, so I would recommend keeping this tab open just for sake of simplicity. And as I've said, you can now have a break of several minutes and come back a bit later. And then eventually the success message will look like this, that your server deployment is complete. Now you have upgraded your server from testing to production, and now you're using App Engine Flexible, which will cost you money. So for the end, what you should do is that you should test your setup once again. So I mean that you should go to your website, navigate the website, interact with it, then check if your web container is firing tags, and then check your server container, see if those events are being received, if your tags are firing there, and if Google Analytics is receiving that data. Once you make sure that everything is working fine, go to the web Google Tag Manager container, publish the container, so click submit, then publish, and then do the same thing in your server container. Click submit and then publish. And from that moment, server-side setup will be activated for all the visitors of your website. And for the end of this tutorial, I wanted to quickly address several frequently asked questions. So the first one is, does server-side Google Tag Manager replace my website GTM setup? The answer is no, because as you have seen in my example, I was using both web GTM and server GTM. Does server-side tagging make my web tracking knowledge obsolete? Absolutely no. Even though some part of your tracking moves to the server, you will still need to know how to track interactions on a website, like button clicks, scrolling, purchases, and so on. Does server-side tagging make the data layer useless? Absolutely no, because proper setups will still require data layer. For example, you ask a developer to add some particular data, for example, purchase information, to the data layer on the website. Then you take that data with web Google Tag Manager, send it to your server, and then do something with that data there. The next question, is server-side tagging a workaround for GDPR, CCPA, or other privacy regulations? No. Server-side tagging is a technology. GDPR, CCPA, and other privacy regulations, they still require consent. So it doesn't matter how you track. Client-side, server-side, you still need to get a valid consent. And finally, can I migrate all my analytics marketing tools now to server-side Google Tag Manager? Yes and no, and actually it depends. Because if you want to migrate a particular tool to server-side, that particular tool must support sending data and receiving data server-side. So you should check their documentation of that particular tool that you want to use, ask them if they support server-side tagging. In the future, the adoption of server-side tagging solutions will grow, but right now, still not everyone is doing that. And that is how you can get started with server-side tagging. But remember, this is just a very first step, and there are many other things to learn, such as cost optimization, sending data to other providers, such as Facebook Conversions API. If you want to learn much more about server-side tagging, then take a look at my intermediate/advanced Google Tag Manager course. I will post a link to it below the video. It explains a lot of important concepts that Google Tag Manager professionals should know, including server container. If you found this video useful, hit the thumbs up button below the video. That will help me understand what videos do you like and what should I create in the future. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager, then consider subscribing to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.